Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel. On this short video we're going to discuss the most important updates that took place during the previous night of the local time. And first we're going to talk about Avdiivka. We have a lot of updates and a lot of details from this territory. The pre-Ukrainian sources report about additional Russian progress in the central part of Avdiivka. The Russians continue movements along the Blue Lake, and as a result of clashes they managed to establish control over a few additional streets. This information was provided and confirmed by pro-Ukrainian mappers Deep State. Other sources reported that the Russians have already established complete control over the bus station over this territory, but we still haven't received any geolocated confirmations of that. We have just some updates, some arrows and so on from different mappers. And the pro-neutral sources like Syriac Maps confirms that the Russians started assault operation over this territory, but yet haven't managed to establish complete control. Anyway, if we summarize everything that we received during the previous days, we can make a conclusion that the Russians, of course, without for now any geolocated video confirmations, but anyway, according to information we have from pro-Ukrainian, pro-Russian, pro-neutral sources, the Russians established significant control, significant foothold in the central part of Avdiivka. The situation develops obviously in their favor, and if the Russians did manage to establish control over the bus station, obviously that means that Avdiivka was cut off in two parts. The chemical plant, the first one, and the rest of Avdiivka, the central in the eastern part, is the second part. And when talking about the second part, obviously this territory currently is located in operational or even tactical encirclement or even in a cauldron. The Ukrainian sources and the Russian sources continue concentration of forces in the southern part of Avdiivka. The Ukrainian sources published the video of FPV drone flying above the southern part. Obviously the Ukrainians expect the intensifying of actions from the Russian side. We discussed yesterday the Russians have already concentrated significant number of forces on the southern part along Chernyshevska, Saborna and Sportivnaya streets. We were watching the video how the Russian soldiers were freely moving from one building to another. Obviously, probably even today, maybe this weekend, the Russians will renew their offensive from the south as well, with the purpose to increase the points of pressure against the Ukrainian forces and to collapse this stronghold and to achieve as much as possible till the end of the February. Now we are moving to the south in direction of Novomikhailivka. As we discussed, the Russians launched offensive operation. According to sources, according to geolocations, the Russians established complete control over the eastern part. The last update from the eastern part of Novomikhailivka we received probably on the 4th of February, almost a week ago. And today we continue receiving updates, and the sources reported that the Russians launched an offensive operation from the southern direction, and the Russians once again entered the cemetery that located on the southeast of Novomikhailivka. And very likely the Russians will continue offensive operation to the west to attack let's say these farms and these barracks to force the Ukrainians to step back to the central or to the western part of Avdiivka. So the situation is getting worse, and the Russians continue offensive operation, continue the storming, and very likely until the February we're going to see in the end of the February, obviously we're going to see completely different picture in comparison with what we can see right now. Now we're moving to probably the most important and the most interesting area. We're talking about Bakhmut, Artyomov's direction, where the Russians recently have renewed their massive offensive operation with significant number of forces. If you remember yesterday, we discussed the Russian offensive operation from the new cemetery in direction of Popovo Forest. Let's take a look at this video once again. On this video we see that there was a very bad weather. The weather was foggy. Obviously, the Ukrainians didn't have much sources to conduct a successful reconnaissance operation with drones, and obviously they haven't seen, or maybe they just were somewhere in the other direction and they didn't see the beginning of Russian offensive operation. Once again, in this video, we see how the Russian infantry landed in front of Popovo Forest, and we see another armored vehicle start moving further to Popovo Forest. We see the infantry moving after the tank or something like this, and after that the battle for Popovo Forest started. So on this video, when talking in particular about this video, the Russians haven't entered the forest. The clashes took place in this area in the vicinity of this icon of AK-47, but this night this geolocation was, by the way, provided by the Military Summary. We were the first who geolocated this attack, and after this attack, after this video was published and geolocated, the sources, pro-Ukrainian, pro-Russian, neutral, started publishing the maps and updates of the maps. And let's take a look what kind of progress according to different mappers we can find in this area. When talking about pro-Russian sources, they're saying that that was not the only attack in direction of Popovo Forest. Basically, the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to collapse the Ukrainian defense belt in Popovo Forest itself along this big stronghold and along this stronghold. Other Russian sources or pro-neutral sources confirms the same situation, that the Russians entered Popovo Forest and they established significant control over some part of the forest, and that the Russians collapsed defense belt between Bogdanovka and the forest as well. And Deep State, the pro-Ukrainian mappers from their side, confirms the same situation, that the Russians established complete control over the forest and over the stronghold between the forest and Bogdanovka. So if we summarize everything according to most of the mappers, neutral, let's say pro-Russian, pro-Ukrainian, the Russians currently control this territory between Bogdanovka and Popovo Forest, and of course Popovo Forest itself. Yet we haven't received even a single geolocated confirmation of either progresses of the Russian forces, so that's why we're not updating all these territories. We're keeping them in the gray zone, but we assume that both either Popovo Forest and the stronghold between New Cemetery and Bogdanovka are under Russian control. So of course now the most important question, what the Russians are going to do next. Obviously, if we calculate the timing, calculate the time the Russians spent to penetrate this defense belt in Popovo Forest, it took around 40 days. So the Russians reached this line somewhere at the beginning of the 2024, at the end of 2023, and after that they started clearing and storming operation of this territory with the different types of weapon, including FAPs, tall flamethrower systems, lots of FPV drones, lots of things were used against this territory, and it took 40 days to reduce Ukrainian defense possibilities completely. On only after 40 days the Russians launched an offensive, and as a result of this offensive, as we can see, the Russian progress. So what does it mean? We can use the same experience, we can use the same numbers, and we can calculate or estimate how much time the Russians need to continue offensive operation and to get the city, the part of Chasiv Yar by the name of Canal. Obviously, the Russians are gonna need another 40 days or something like this to establish control over this territory, because this defense belt wasn't damaged by the Russians. Maybe there were a few FPV drone strikes or something like this, maybe a few artillery strikes, but anyway we can say that this defense belt is correct and around for, let's say, 90%. So this defense belt wasn't reduced to ruins as the previous one in the vicinity of the New Cemetery. So obviously the Russians are gonna spend a lot of time to bypass this territory and to get right in front of Chasiv Yar and the quarter by the name of Canal. So I assume that of course I'm not saying that the Russians are not going to do this. They don't have any other option. First they will attack this belt with FPV drones. Obviously the Russians will attack this territory with the tall flamethrower systems. The Russians will attack this area with multiple launch rocket systems and so on. But as I understand, currently the Russians are going to do this just to pin down the Ukrainians, to reduce defense belt, but the main focus of the Russian forces we can find from Popovo Forest to the south in direction of the forest and the forest belts and tree lines that located to the south of Popovo Forest and to the north of Ivanovska. So according to my understanding, this is the next and primary target of the Russians on this foothold for the next let's say 20 days, because this territory will be collapsed by the Russians much faster. If we increase the numbers of this, we're going to see that the Russians were already bombing this territory with different types of weapons. This area was under very heavy fire. The Russians were bombing this territory with FAPs. The Russians were bombing this territory with FPV drones, with multi-launch rocket system, with tall flamethrower systems, with RBK 500, the cluster aviation bombs. So this area is already was already damaged by the Russians. So it will take obviously much less time in comparison with the Western stronghold, and and the Russians are able to capture and to move further in direction of the Ivanovska from the north within the next 10 days. So they can get there within the next 10 days, and I assume that it's going to be much easier than to move to Canal. And this is very important because from these positions, from this perspective, the Russians can launch an offensive operation further to the south to attack Ivanovska from the north. Because as we know, currently Kamerton Akhmat special forces are storming Ivanovska from the southern area from this way. And if they increase the points of pressure, Ivanovska will collapse, will be defeated, and will be captured by the Russians, or at least the battle for the village will start. And this is going to be another media and political and reputational losses and damage for Ukrainians, for Zelensky, and probably to new commander-in-chief Syrsky. So this is my projections that the next step is Ivanovska, like operational step. Of course, the stronghold to the west is the more important, but let's say to shorten the maintain the combat line, to deal another immediate damage, Ivanovska is a very good option for this. Furthermore, the Russians continue bombing and attacking the Ukrainians along Canal, along the main supply roads that Ukraine used to redeploy forces from one side of the Canal to another. So the clashes in this area continues. We expect more updates from this territory for today. Now we are moving further to the north, and we have additional updates from Sinkovka. The Russian sources, pro-Ukrainian sources, different sources confirms additional Russian progress in the northern part. Yesterday we were talking that the Russians currently control 2 of 7 streets of the village. There are 7 streets in total according to some sources, and now we have more updates about Russian progress, that the Russians managed to dig in deeper, and that currently the Russians control something like this in Sinkovka, and offensive operation continues further to the south. So the situation is getting worse and worse for the Ukrainians on this direction as well. When talking to Avdiivka, Krakhmalna, we haven't received anything. During the previous night, the Russians bombed Kharkiv very heavily. We have a lot of geolocations, we have a lot of videos, a lot of explosions, a lot of strikes. Very likely the Russians managed to discover and to destroy fuel depot of the Ukrainian forces in this area, which will also cause some problems to Ukrainian logistics. Furthermore, the sources reported about Gerань strikes along the ports, along the Romanian-Ukrainian border in Odessa region. Probably today we're going to receive some details and updates and geolocations about those attacks. When talking about Kiev itself, the sources are saying, the New York Times reported that the Ukrainians have air defense missiles just till the beginning of March. After that, they're going to have nothing. Furthermore, Zelensky, according to information we have, dismissed not just the commander-in-chief Zaluzhny, also he dismissed the head of the general staff, Shaptala. So the entire Zaluzhny team was dismissed, and interesting what is going to be next. Germany reported that regarding the situation with the United States of America, Europe will continue supporting Ukraine, will send more and more military aid and so on. More and more problems we can find in the western part of Ukraine. Today was published another video from small village somewhere in the western part of Ukraine, Kasmach. As you can see, there are just women in the hall. This is like a town hall, and people were talking, asking for local authorities where their friends, men's, husbands, children's, brothers, trying to force them to give the answer. So there is like a very, very negative situation in the western part of Ukraine. People are very angry, people are very upset, they are tired of war, and we see that the Ukrainians are getting in much, much worse situation every day in comparison with the previous one. And that's it for the short video on military summary. Channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching, subscribe to my channel, put your likes, share my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.